Ordinary people reaching their absolute breaking point is not a modern phenomenon. History is full of these stories. Here are 3 moments in history when someone finally snapped and the consequences shook entire kingdoms around them. Number 1. Jeanne de Clisson, the noblewoman who became the most feared pirate in the English Channel. It is the year 1300, and a red-haired girl is born into a minor noble family in the Brittany region of France. Her parents name her Jeanne, and from the moment she arrives, they see her beauty as their most valuable financial asset. By the time she is old enough to walk to a church altar, they have already arranged her first marriage for land. She is 12 years old, has no concept of love, and simply accepts the life that has been chosen for her completely. She has 2 children with her first husband, builds a quiet life, and then he dies when she is just 26 years old. As a young widow with children in medieval France, remarrying quickly is not a choice. It is a matter of basic survival. Her second marriage is annulled almost immediately because his family decides she is not wealthy enough for their son to keep. She then meets and marries a Breton nobleman named Olivier de Clisson, and something entirely unexpected happens between them. Against every expectation of the era, Jeanne and Olivier fall completely and genuinely in love with each other. They build a life together, have 5 children, accumulate wealth and influence, and by every measure, they are thriving completely. Then, in 1341, the Duke of Brittany dies without a clear heir, and a brutal succession war tears the entire region apart. England and France both see an opportunity and immediately begin backing opposing sides to control whoever wins the conflict. Jeanne and Olivier side with Charles de Blois and align themselves with the French king, Philip VI of France. Olivier fights, leads troops, helps retake a lost city, and is captured by the English before being traded back to the French. The ransom paid for his return is suspiciously small, and the French court begins whispering that he must have betrayed them. In 1343, the Pope negotiates a temporary truce, and the French king invites Breton nobles to Paris to celebrate the peace. Olivier travels to France, believing the invitation is genuine, and is arrested the moment he steps onto French territory. He is charged with treason, thrown into a dungeon, given a trial that was decided long before it ever actually began. In August, he is marched to a public square in Paris and beheaded in front of a crowd assembled to watch him die. His head is then removed, placed on a spike, and shipped back to Brittany to be displayed as a warning to others. For any person, this would be devastating, but for a noble family, this level of public disgrace was the ultimate humiliation. Jeanne travels to where her husband's head has been displayed and brings her 2 youngest sons to stand directly before it. She forces them to look, without turning away, at their father's decaying face surrounded by flies in the summer heat. She tells them to remember this moment, to memorize it, and to understand that a king has done this to their family. Then, at 43 years old, Jeanne de Clisson makes a decision that will define the rest of her life entirely. She sells everything, her land, her jewelry, her estates, every asset she owns, and converts it all into weapons and soldiers. She arrives at a nearby French-controlled castle and approaches the gate alone, weeping, presenting herself as a grieving widow. The commander recognizes her as a supporter of Charles de Blois, takes pity on her, and orders the gates opened wide. The moment the gates swing open, Jeanne's hidden army charges through and overwhelms the garrison before anyone can respond. Every soldier inside is killed on her orders except for one, who is sent back to the king carrying her personal message. She continues raiding French-controlled castles along the Normandy coast, building her reputation and her resources simultaneously. Then she does something no one in France expected. She purchases 3 warships and transforms herself into a pirate commander. She has the hulls painted black and the sails dyed deep red, making her fleet unmistakable and deliberately terrifying from a distance. She names her flagship My Revenge, arms herself with a large battle axe, and begins hunting French merchant vessels in the Channel. She is not interested in cargo or profit. She boards each ship specifically to find and personally execute every French nobleman aboard. A single survivor is always left on each ship, kept alive for one purpose only: to carry the story back to the king. Word of the black-sailed fleet and the red-haired noblewoman with the axe reaches King Philip, and he begins to understand what he created. The English, always looking for leverage against France, learn about her and immediately begin funding her operations generously. In 1348, the French navy finally locates her fleet and attacks, destroying her ships in a battle she cannot survive on the water. When French soldiers board her flagship, expecting to capture her, she is already gone, escaped in a small open boat with a few crew members. They drift for 6 days with no food and no water in the open ocean, and several of her crew members do not survive. On the 7th day, Jeanne washes onto the English coast, barely alive, but alive enough to keep her promise to herself. King Edward III of England receives her as a respected military ally and welcomes her onto English soil with full honours. 2 years later, King Philip VI dies, closing the chapter she had dedicated a decade of her life to writing in blood. She eventually marries an English knight, returns peacefully to Brittany, and lives out her remaining years without further incident. She dies at 59, which sounds young today, but for a mother of 7 who spent years as a pirate commander was extraordinary. Number 2. Gengobei Katayama, the charcoal merchant who lost everything chasing love in the wrong place entirely. It is the late 17th century in Japan, and a prosperous charcoal dealer named Gengobei lives in a village near Edo. He runs a successful business, has built a comfortable life, but carries one burden that has followed him since childhood. A bout of smallpox in his youth left his face badly scarred, and no woman in his village would look at him directly. He travels to the city of Edo to rest and clear his head, and accidentally wanders into the Yoshiwara pleasure district. He finds himself surrounded by beautiful women who smile at him as he passes, something that has simply never happened before. He spots a courtesan in the distance who is, by every account, the most beautiful woman he has ever seen in his life. He follows her, learns her name is Yatsuhashi, and discovers she is an oiran, a courtesan of the absolute highest rank. Oiran of her status only entertained nobles and the extremely wealthy, and merchants sat at the very bottom of the social order. But when he approaches, Yatsuhashi smiles and accepts him, and something inside Gengobei breaks open completely in that moment. At this time, courtesans in Yoshiwara had the legal right to refuse any customer they chose not to entertain for any reason. For the first time in his life, a woman is choosing to see him, rather than looking past the scars on his face. He is convinced this is real, that she genuinely sees something in him worth seeing, and he falls completely and desperately in love. He stops returning home, stops managing his business, and spends every day and every coin he has in Yoshiwara with her. He buys her the most extravagant gifts he can find, spares no expense, and tells himself that love is worth any price. Back in his village, the charcoal business collapses without him, and his debts grow until his home and land are seized entirely. He returns to Yoshiwara with no business, no money, no home, and nothing left to offer except the feelings he cannot let go. He wanders the district desperately trying to catch a glimpse of her, until one day he spots her walking in a procession. He calls out to her loudly, and she looks straight ahead without pausing, without acknowledging him, without any sign she heard him at all. In that silence, he understands what she was, what he was to her, and exactly how badly he had deceived himself for years. She was a professional, he was a customer, and the moment his money was gone, the entire relationship ceased to exist for her. He finds her again on December 19th, 1696, and calls out one final time. "Just say one kind word. I have lost everything for you." She keeps walking, her eyes forward, her expression unchanged, as though he is simply part of the street noise around her. Something gives way inside Gengobei completely in that moment, and he follows her into a tea house with a short sword drawn. He catches her on a staircase, shouts that she has humiliated him for the last time, and kills her with a single stroke. He runs to the roof, attempting to escape, while a crowd gathers below, and neighbors attempt to pull him down with long poles. Someone throws a bucket of water that causes him to slip and fall into the crowd, where he is immediately seized and restrained. He is tried, sentenced to death, and executed. A man who had built a real life and destroyed it entirely for an illusion. Number 3. Jeffrey Hudson, the smallest man in the English court, who refused to be anyone's punchline any longer. It is 1619 in the small English town of Oakham, and a boy named Jeffrey Hudson is born looking perfectly normal at first. His parents watch him grow through his first years, learning to crawl, to walk, to speak. But he never grows taller. By age 3, Jeffrey stands just 19 inches tall and shows no signs that this will ever change in any meaningful way. In the 1600s, little people were regarded as barely above animals, and Jeffrey's father understood exactly what this meant for his son. Through his work as keeper of baiting bulls for the Duke of Buckingham, he saw one possible path that might protect Jeffrey's future. When Jeffrey turns 7, his father presents him to the Duchess of Buckingham as a gift, hoping the court will keep him safe. Noble families of the era collected little people as curiosities to entertain guests, and Jeffrey was exceptionally well proportioned. The Duchess accepts him immediately, and he joins her household, fed and housed, and treated as an object of fascination and amusement. The Duke and Duchess are soon expecting a visit from King Charles and his new French bride, Queen Henrietta Maria of France. They plan a surprise. At the royal banquet, a large decorated pie is placed before the Queen as a mysterious centerpiece. On cue, the crust bursts open, and Jeffrey, dressed in a tiny suit of armor, leaps out and begins dueling an invisible opponent. The Queen finds him so extraordinary and delightful that she requests to keep him, and the Duchess hands him over immediately. Jeffrey joins the Queen's household in London, receives a proper noble education, is given servants, and is treated with genuine warmth. He develops a sincere and lasting loyalty to Henrietta Maria, who treats him better than almost anyone else in his life ever has. His most famous routine involves partnering with a giant named William Evans, who stands over 7 feet tall at dinner parties. Evans would dramatically produce a loaf of bread from one enormous coat pocket, and then produce Jeffrey from the other pocket instead. It earned laughter every time. And for a while, Jeffrey accepted this as the price of the comfortable life he had been given. But comfort and acceptance are not the same thing. And Jeffrey slowly understood that no achievement would ever earn him real respect. No matter how skilled he became, how educated, how capable, he would always be the joke at the end of every evening's entertainment. In 1642, civil war erupted in England, as King Charles's belief in his absolute divine authority finally pushed Parliament into open rebellion. Jeffrey petitioned the Queen for an active military role, arguing that he was an expert horseman and a skilled pistol marksman. She gave him a genuine commission, captain of the horse, and Jeffrey accepted it with total seriousness and deep personal pride. Many in the court considered the appointment itself to be the joke, which only made Jeffrey more determined to prove them wrong. But before he could demonstrate anything in the field, the royalists began losing the war, and the Queen fled to France in 1644. Jeffrey went with her, and court life in France resumed with the same dinners, the same guests, and the same expectations as before. Geoffrey made his position clear to everyone around him immediately. Lord Minimus was gone, and he would not be performing anymore. Any man who chose to mock him, he announced, would be answering for that choice with his life rather than receiving his laughter. A nobleman named Charles Crofts decided that Geoffrey's declaration was itself the setup to an elaborate and amusing joke he was telling. Nobody recorded exactly what Crofts said to Geoffrey's face, but whatever it was, Geoffrey challenged him to a formal pistol duel immediately. Crofts accepted while visibly laughing, clearly expecting the duel itself to be the punchline of whatever game Geoffrey was playing. On the day of the duel, Crofts reached into his coat and produced a water squirt gun, to thunderous laughter from the assembled crowd. Geoffrey did not laugh, did not react to the crowd, did not deviate from what he had already decided he was going to do. He ordered that Crofts be given a real pistol. The two men mounted horses, rode to distance, and faced each other across the field. The signal was given. They charged. Crofts fired and missed the small moving target entirely, as the crowd continued to find this amusing. Geoffrey raised his pistol, aimed without hurry, and fired once. The bullet struck Crofts directly in the forehead, and he died instantly. The laughter stopped with a completeness that must have been remarkable. The Queen's little curiosity had just killed a nobleman in a duel. Dueling was illegal in France, and Geoffrey was arrested immediately, facing execution for the murder of a member of the noble class. Queen Henrietta negotiated on his behalf and managed to reduce his sentence from execution to exile from French territory permanently. They said their goodbyes, and Geoffrey sailed away from the only person who had ever genuinely cared about his well-being and safety. He was captured almost immediately by Barbary pirates, sold into slavery in North Africa, and spent the next 25 years enslaved. He eventually escaped, returned to England, was thrown into prison for 2 years during an anti-Catholic purge, and then released. He died just a few years later in 1682, penniless, buried in an unmarked grave with no ceremony and no recognition of any kind. Though there is one final detail. Geoffrey appeared unexpectedly at Queen Henrietta's funeral in 1669, years after he was supposed to be enslaved. Some historians believe she never stopped protecting him and had quietly arranged his safety the entire time without anyone knowing.